And as you can tell by the title, man, we're going to be talking about downstate Norteños and the fact that they don't even exist. Let's keep it 100. I'm doing this topic because there's always a lot of questions like, how did the upstate Norteños be able to establish up north and so forth, man? And let's just get to the real of it. Southern California has always been a whole different type of climate, a whole different type of atmosphere, a lot more gente out that way. And what I mean by that, there's so many neighborhoods that were set a certain way. You know what I'm saying? Like Watts, Compton, East LA, West LA, you know what I'm saying? All these different areas, man, that were traditionally just had gangs out there. And the culture just was always about gang banging and violence. Whereas up in Northern California, man, up until recently, even the Bay Area wasn't as overpopulated as it is today. It was more rural areas. San Jose wasn't the seventh biggest city in the United States at that time. And it had a whole different, more slower, more relaxed type of atmosphere. Yes, there was gangs, there was cholos, there was raza and all that, right? But it was less of a priority at that time as far as the gang banging. Gangs were not really a big thing out there in the communities at that time. Most families that were moving up north, they were moving up north for work. They were working in the farms and so forth, different plants out there. And, Northern California traditionally was a home for a lot of revolutionary movements. They had a lot of them out there, from the Black Panthers, a lot of Brown Berets, Cesar Chavez, whatever your opinion is of him. I get it. But that was the culture over there. It was more puro raza and this and that out there. LA had the same type of atmosphere, of course, you know what I mean? But being that it was so overpopulated, and be it that there were so many different groups, and be it that there was so much conflict that goes back for years, the gangbanging level was just on a whole different level out there, man. And I'm going to keep it real. They're definitely about that action. They know how to maneuver. They know how to do what they do out there in the streets when it comes to gangbanging. When it comes to setting people up, staging fucking hits, drive-by shootings, they mastered all that, It's not that Northern California doesn't get active like that. There's some active motherfuckers nowadays out there. But it was less inclined about gangbanging, you know what I mean? All that stuff started to come nowadays. It's even today. There's less action that's occurring within these particular groups, you know what I mean? Someone's trying to call me. So Southern California, man, being also close to the border, it was able to also grab a lot of recruits, also a lot of resources. You know what I'm saying? To where Southern California just became established. All these hoods basically fell under the MA control. And once the MA had control of these hoods and their bidding, there's no way for any hood up north to migrate down south. I mean, you have literally, man, the smallest hood out there in Los Angeles may be the biggest hood up in Northern California. There's not too many big hoods out there. You may have Market Street, Semsters, 24th and Mission, and a couple other hoods that maybe were pretty deep, but traditionally they do not compete on that level like Los Angeles, man. So if anybody was to try to go up there anywhere down south and establish any type of a foundation, they're gonna get the business, man. There's no way. You'd have to literally take out there probably about 50 hoods, 50 neighborhoods, just to be able to exist out there in Southern California. The hoods in Northern California, everything's a lot more spread out, right? So that enabled a lot of people to go out there and establish a presence and start recruiting members. And see, like I said earlier, the Mexican immigration that occurred, going into like San Jose and San Francisco and all these different areas, the Valley, that enabled them a recruiting process. You know what I mean? They were able to recruit people under their umbrella and push the suit. You know what I'm saying? As well as the homegrown ones, or the ones that just decided to establish themselves. So like I said, man, the gangbanging mentality between North and South, it's not that anyone's more with the business, There's a little bit different type of stilo when it comes to gangbanging. They're more about shoot, drive-bys, and this and that. Whereas before we started getting that era of shooting, we should just chunk them. You know what I'm saying? Stabbings, little things like that. And then we have football games on the weekends, sometimes against other neighborhoods. You know what I'm saying? It was more about low riding. It was more about, showing how fucking machine going you were out there in the streets than it was about trying to pick off your enemy. LA's always had that mentality, you know? And being that it's so compacted, right, with so many different barrios and so many different raza, there's no way any Norteños were going to be able to go down there and establish any type of presence down there, period. And that's me keeping it 100. You know, I see it in the comments, you know, why ain't there no downstate Norteños in, but there's upstate Sureños? Different environment. The gang banging mindset is a little bit different in Northern California in the 80s and 90s. It didn't kick off in the 90s. Didn't kick off gang banging until like the 90s. And by then, the Sureños already had crept in, and they already had a little bit of presence in pockets in different areas. You know, like Atwater, Santa Cruz, all kinds of little towns like that. Richmond, you know, where they laid a foundation. Once that foundation was laid, you know what I'm saying, it just took over. See, traditionally, all those hoods, before they fell under the Trece down south, they were always already deep. All those hoods were deep. Northern California, it wasn't like that. You had homeboys and stuff like that, but it wasn't, you know, in mass numbers. You know what I'm saying? Being a gang member out there in the community wasn't as a big deal as it is in the 90s. So the Northerners came maybe a couple years short. You know what I'm saying? Because if they would have been pushing that line like they were in 93 back in 84, there probably wouldn't have been no Sureños at that time. But they were already there. You know what I mean? I can talk about San Jose. You had Vados, was it Sombras Locals and a couple other hoods that were out there at that time. Like by 84, 85, 86, you know? And there was no strong presence of Norteños at the time. Yeah, there was homeboys out there. I mean, back till 84, 82, you would still see dudes that became NF members later on kicking it wearing brown paños and blue paños. I have pictures of a whole bunch of them, you know? That didn't come in till later, you know what I'm saying? And, I'd say around 1990, 91 is when you started to first start to get the little bit of push of Norteños out in the streets, and still they were a little bit outnumbered, you know? And like I said, there's no way any Norteños could infiltrate any type of presence down south, period. It's just not going to happen, man. That's just me keeping it 100. And it doesn't mean like, you know, the Norteños are inferior or anything like that. It's just a whole different ballgame. You know what I'm saying? Not enough numbers. You know what I'm saying? You try to go down south, man, every other street's a fucking hood. You know what I'm saying? So how is any Norteño hood going to sit there and go out there? You're going to go out there with 20 heads and think you're going to take things over? Come on, man. That whole hood's going to be wiped out. You know? And that's just the reality of it, man. You know? In general, like I said, man, there's a little bit different type of 80s and 90s, as you know, like we were used to fighting. We used to chunking them. And I seen that difference when I went to prison. You know what I'm saying? There was a lot of Southsiders that could chunk them, but a lot of Norteños in general could chunk them because that's just all we used to do was chunk them back then. We weren't really shooting. We weren't stabbing till later on. You know what I'm saying? All that stuff came about years later, the gang banging mentality, but everything was already, they fell wayside a little too early. You get what I'm saying? So, you know, I hear people asking the questions, do you ever think that there'd be an NF member pulled from down south again? I think there's always a possibility. You know, if you can infiltrate someone who has a falling out or doesn't believe in what the MA agenda is, and they deem worthy and they prove themselves, there's always that opportunity. Because I've seen federal rosters before that have people from like Kansas, Georgia, Utah, Florida, Texas that are on Norteño fucking rosters in the feds. You know, so anybody that's deemed worthy and is willing to stand against the MA can always be committed and obligated. You know what I'm saying? I've been hearing different rumblings that there were certain Cs that were doing dealings with Sureños and stuff since the end of hostilities. And, you know, I don't know how that's going to work out, man. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how that agenda even came about, man. But sometimes money comes first, man. You know, I have heard about interstate compact, about being able to go through there with no issues. There's been things that have been discussed about that based upon business dealings and S&Y and so forth, man. That, you know, that would be the only thing that would be able to exist. But, you know, Sureños don't even get along with Sureños. What do you think they're going to do if a Norteño hood was out there? Every hood's going to attack that hood, you know. And the odds ain't even. You know You know what I'm saying? You're stepping into an area where there's probably about 100,000 Hispanic gang members within a 30-mile radius. You're not going to do too well at all. It's just not going to happen. You know what I'm saying? Anyways, just a little quick spiel, man. You know, and I'm trying to shed some light about the realities of why there is no downstate Norteños. People always question that, man. I had to put it out there, like it just wouldn't happen. You know, it's a different culture. Everybody's been raised different. You know, the pace up north was a lot slower. Nowadays, you go to certain areas up north, man, it's be cracking. You know, not that it was weak back then. It just was a little bit slower, a little bit smaller, and there was less barrios that were in control out there in the streets. You know, you see the difference? It's pretty self-explicit, man. You know, that's the only stance that you can take. That's why there's upstate Norteños. I mean, upstate Sureños, but no downstate Norteños.